My wife said, "I'm taking the kids." Then the judge asked for a DNA test. The declaration wasn't a shouted threat in the heat of an argument, but a cold, premeditated statement delivered with a chilling calm over breakfast, as if she were simply informing me of a change in the weather. She had already packed their small suitcases, the ones they used for weekends at their grandparents', and they were lined up by the front door like little soldiers waiting for deployment, a sight that made my coffee taste like ash. For months, our home had felt like a museum of a happy family that no longer existed, filled with the silent tension of her whispered phone calls and the constant, critical eye she cast on my every interaction with our son, Liam, and our daughter, Emma. I'd clung to the naive hope that we could fix things, that this was just another rough patch, but the suitcases by the door and the absolute resolute in her eyes told me the war was over and she had already won in her mind. She painted me as a ghost in my own home, a work-obsessed father who was never present, a narrative she had carefully constructed and nurtured for the court documents I would soon be served. The official papers arrived 2 days later, and reading them was like reading an obituary for the father I had tried so hard to be. Every sacrifice, every late night at the office to afford the house in the good school district was twisted into evidence of my neglect and emotional absence. Her claims were bolstered by carefully selected snippets of our life. My brief, doctor-prescribed use of anti-anxiety medication after my own father's sudden death was framed as a history of instability, and my one missed parent-teacher conference due to a critical business trip was presented as a pattern of disinterest. Our home, once a sanctuary, became a minefield where every conversation was potential evidence, every raised voice a mark against my character, and the children, sensing the seismic shift, became quiet and anxious, clinging to their mother who whispered assurances that painted me as the villain. I felt the foundation of my life crumbling, not just my marriage, but my very identity as a parent being systematically dismantled by the woman who had vowed to be my partner. The first hearing was a clinical and humiliating experience. A sterile room with the most intimate details of my failings were laid bare by her sharp-tongued lawyer. I sat there, feeling the judge's neutral gaze upon me, as my wife's attorney meticulously cataloged my absences, my shortcomings, and my moments of human weakness, weaving them into a portrait of a man unfit for shared custody, let alone the primary custody she now sought. My own lawyer fought back, highlighting my involvement in coaching Liam's soccer team and my nightly ritual of reading to Emma, but it felt like trying to stop a tidal wave with a teacup against the relentless, prepared onslaught. I could see the case slipping away, the judge's expression growing more closed off with each point the opposition made, and a profound sense of despair began to hollow me out from the inside. It felt like a foregone conclusion, a legal rubber stamp on the erasure of my role in my children's lives. Then the judge, an older man with a weary face that had surely seen every permutation of familial strife, leaned forward and interrupted the proceedings with a question that seemed at first like a simple formality. He asked about the children's comprehensive medical histories, wanting to know if there were any significant genetic conditions or hereditary concerns that the court should be made aware of for future care. My wife, Sarah, answered immediately, her voice confident and clear, stating that there were no such issues on her side of the family and that she was unaware of any on mine, a dismissive wave of her hand attempting to shut down the line of questioning. For certainty, her eagerness to move on struck a discordant note in my mind, and a memory long buried under the pain of the present surfaced with the force of a lightning bolt. I remembered a specific, serious conversation from early in our marriage, a conversation she could not possibly have forgotten. I found my voice cutting through the heavy air of the courtroom, my tone respectful but firm as I addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor, if I may," I interjected, "that is not entirely accurate." I explained that my family has a strong, documented history of Factor V Leiden, a hereditary blood clotting disorder that requires vigilance and specific medical oversight. I reminded the court and my wife that early in our marriage, concerned about passing it on, we had both undergone genetic testing to see if we were carriers, a fact she was intimately aware of because we had discussed the results and their implications for our future children at length. The judge's demeanor shifted instantly, His tired eyes sharpened with interest, and he turned his gaze fully on Sarah, his previous neutrality replaced by piercing scrutiny. He noted that such a condition was not a minor footnote, but a significant and relevant medical factor that responsible parents would absolutely need to monitor. He looked directly at my wife, his voice dropping into a quieter, more dangerous register. "Given the serious nature of this potential hereditary condition," he asked, "have your children ever been tested for it?" The confidence drained from Sarah's face, replaced by a flicker of panic that she tried and failed to mask. She stammered, shifting in her seat, and admitted that no, they had not been tested. She then added, almost defensively, that her new attorney, a man I didn't realize was more than her lawyer, a fact that would soon crash over me, had advised her it was an unnecessary expense and a scare tactic. This admission was a catastrophic error, revealing that her legal counsel was personally invested and giving medical advice far outside his purview. The judge's expression hardened into granite. The disregard for a potentially life-threatening health issue on the advice of a boyfriend masquerading as impartial counsel fundamentally shattered her credibility as the concerned, hyper-vigilant parent she had presented herself to be. The judge, now deeply suspicious of every claim she had made, did something extraordinary. He stated that before he could rule on matters of custody, he needed to establish paternity beyond any doubt to ensure all medical and legal precedents were perfectly clear for both children. He immediately ordered a court-mandated paternity test for Liam and Emma, a standard procedure in some jurisdictions but one that felt like a seismic intervention in that moment. The gavel fell and the hearing was adjourned, leaving us all in a state of suspended animation. The following week was an agony of waiting, a torturous limbo where every possible outcome played out in my mind, from vindication to utter defeat, while the atmosphere in our shared home became a frozen tundra of unspoken accusations and terrifying possibilities. When we reconvened in the stark, quiet courtroom, the air was so thick with tension you could barely breathe. The court officer handed the sealed envelope containing the results to the judge, who opened it with deliberate slowness, his eyes scanning the document. He looked up first at me, then at my wife, his face an unreadable mask of judicial impartiality, but I could see a faint flicker of surprise in his eyes. He cleared his throat and announced the findings to the silent room. I was, conclusively, the biological father of our 7-year-old son, Liam. A wave of relief so powerful it made me dizzy washed over me. But it was short-lived, as the judge's expression grew even more grave. He then stated that the results for our 5-year-old daughter, Emma, indicated that I was not her biological father. The gasp that escaped my wife's lips was a mixture of shock and horror, but it was nothing compared to the visceral, physical blow that landed in my own chest, knocking the wind from me as if I'd been struck. I stared at her bright, smiling face in a photograph I kept in my wallet, her features that I had lovingly traced since infancy, her laugh that was the light of my life. How could she not be mine? The world tilted on its axis, colors bleeding into a meaningless blur as the reality of my wife's infidelity, the scale of her deception, crashed down upon me with the force of a tsunami. The courtroom erupted into chaos of murmurs and my lawyer's hand on my shoulder, but I was lost, adrift in the sea of betrayal that rewrote the history of my entire family. My wife was sobbing now, not in denial, but in a way that suggested a terrible hidden truth had just been violently unearthed. In the midst of this personal earthquake, the judge, maintaining a remarkable, almost supernatural calm, did something that would unravel the final, deepest layer of the mystery. He stated that given the extraordinary circumstances and the need for absolute legal clarity regarding parental rights and responsibilities, he was also ordering a maternity test. He needed to be certain that the chain of custody, so to speak, was fully established before any rulings could be made. This request seemed absurd to me in my shattered state. Of course, she was the mother, she had given birth to her, but the judge was insistent, his legal mind covering every conceivable base. My wife's reaction to this new order was not of righteous indignation, but pure, unadulterated terror, a collapse so complete that she had to be helped into her chair by her now pale lawyer boyfriend. We were sent back into another week of hellish waiting, a period where the simple word "father" had lost all meaning for me. and the love I felt for Emma warred violently with the shocking biological truth. The second court session felt like a funeral. The judge received the new report, opened it, and for the first time his professional composure broke, his eyes widening in genuine astonishment. He looked from the paper to my wife, who was trembling uncontrollably, and then to me, his gaze filled with an unexpected pity. He slowly announced the results to the silent room. The DNA analysis confirmed that not only was I not the biological father of Emma, but that Sarah was not her biological mother either. The silence that followed was absolute, a vacuum of sound that sucked all the air out of the room. The revelation was so bizarre, so utterly outside the realm of any scenario I could have imagined that my mind simply refused to process it. Through choked sobs and under the relentless calm questioning of the judge, the horrifying truth finally tumbled out.
Years ago, early in our marriage, Sarah had suffered a late-term miscarriage, a devastating loss she had hidden from everyone, including me, consumed by a shame and grief she felt she couldn't share. In her subsequent state of profound psychological trauma and desperation, terrified of being seen as a failure and of losing me, she had secretly connected with a shady network and arranged a private, illegal adoption from a young girl who wanted no questions asked. She had faked the entire pregnancy with cleverly timed trips to visit a sick aunt out of state and had returned home with a baby, our Emma, presenting her as our own biological child, a miraculous gift. Her fight for custody wasn't just based on lies about me. It was a desperate, panicked attempt to maintain control over the monumental lie that was the very foundation of our daughter's identity, a lie that had now exploded and exposed us all. The judge adjourned the case indefinitely, his final ruling a complex tangle of temporary guardianship, child welfare investigations, and a mandate for extensive family therapy. There were no winners here, only the shattered pieces of a family built on a secret. I walked out of that courtroom not as a victorious father, but as a legal stranger to the little girl I adored, a man betrayed by his wife on an unimaginable scale, yet still bound to her by the shared love for a child who was legally ours in no clear way. The woman I thought I knew was a stranger, her actions born of a pain I never knew she carried, and the future was a terrifying blank page. The battle for taking the kids had become a tragic struggle to simply define what the word family even meant anymore, with the well-being of two beautiful, innocent children hanging in the balance of our broken reality.